A superhuman is someone who is self-aware and who cultivates their natural self. Each one of us are gifted with our unique observations, inclinations, and curiosities about life. The goal of the Superhuman Project is to help professionals be their best self, to realize our full potential, to honor our natural selves. In each episode, I will invite professionals on top of their field and I will ask them questions about their quest for self-mastery, self-awareness, what makes them successful, and how they stay at the top of their game. Ultimately, it is about living a life we always wanted to live and not letting other people define it for us. Making sure we fulfill the potential that God has given us and we are living our best selves. Let's jump in. So today we have Brian Kropp, the Group Vice President for HR practice at Gartner. And thank you, Brian, for giving us time. I was doing some research on you, like I told you in the prep. I'm very amused about your background, and definitely thank you for sharing your insights with the Superhuman Project community here. So just a little bit about your background, which I came to know. You are an economics major and you moved into HR. So you're an economics major from Clemson University. You moved into HR, started as a consultant, moved to be a practice leader at CEB, and eventually you became a group vice president, and you have been with Gartner for almost 3 years. And you are actively contributing on topics related to HR trends to HR executives. And you were also nominated as top thought leaders in 2021 by People Hum. So congratulations on that. So a lot of things I want to ask you about, but I'll let you introduce yourself to our viewers and also just talk about your reaction to the concept of the Superhuman Project.
Yeah, it's interesting. Before I got here, in terms of what I was working on, I actually went and got a PhD and thought I was going to go be a professor. And then I realized what a professor's life is actually like and decided that wasn't such a great idea and great fit for me, which is why I ended up working for a company, executive board for a while. But even before that, I was working at the World Bank. I worked at the CIA for a little bit, a couple of other places from that perspective. And I think one of the big things that I've learned is that, and it starts with when I started working the HR practice here, is I didn't think it was going to be really cool or interesting to do. I liked the people that I was going to be working with, but from a topic sort of day-to-day work of kind of the content, what it was going to be about, I thought kind of HR and talent and that sort of stuff was boring, pathetic, uninteresting, etc. And one of the things that I realized after a couple of years, I was lucky enough to have a chance to talk to a couple of different CEOs, a couple of different board members. One of the biggest things that I learned was how companies think about the people in their organization is one of the biggest factors that defines their performance. And as I think about this group and the Superhuman Project and those sorts of things, this idea of understanding where within your career, within your work, you actually have the most leverage is one of the things that I think is really, really important as you're trying to figure out what you should be working on or what you should be doing or how you should be applying kind of skills and capabilities that you have. Just this question of where can you actually have the most leverage and the biggest impact and the biggest scalable impact. And for me, at least, thinking through that and understanding that was one of the most important ways that I've been able to think about what I've been working on, what I've been doing, and then the implications that come from that.
So that's very insightful. You thought of becoming a professor, and now you're finding solutions and trends for HR executives. So let me ask you this: what similarities you find in your aim to become a professor and what you are doing now? What similarities are there in the two jobs?
Yeah. So what I spend a lot of my time doing now, and I'm lucky enough to sit at the center of a network of HR executives, so heads of HR, heads of recruiting, heads of learning and development, and so on. And there's thousands of HR executives in that network. So different industries, different sizes, uh, uh, different focuses, different backgrounds, all that sort of stuff. And what's really similar about going through grad school, wanting to be a professor, what I'm doing now, is I've got the ability to look at hard problems and try to unpack them and figure out what's most interesting about those problems, or what are different kind and innovative ways to think about this problem. So when you're a professor, you've got the privilege of being able to explore new areas, figure out new things, and then teach them to people, and to help create the get those moments of like, oh wow, that's a great new way to think about it, and kind of those moments of education. Now I get to do the same thing, but rather than students, I get to do it for executives. So within Gartner, within our HR practice, we spend an enormous amount of time trying to understand what are the challenges that executives face, but then what are the unique solutions that smart companies have come up with, and how can you take those smart solutions and then help people apply them in their own company and create those moments of education and aha, and like, wow, I can do things different. And by doing things differently and thinking about a problem from a different angle, I can have a big impact. And those are the similarities there. So it's the exploration of finding something new, and then the ability to teach that something new to a broad group of people. Really similar and very transferable across the two types of jobs.
Very helpful. So you talk about tracking hot trends and hot problems. So what are the hot problems or hot trends for HR executives these days?
Yeah, so there's a variety of things that they're really working on. And HR has evolved a ton across the last handful of years. If you think about HR 10, 15 years ago, it was about process management and staffing and those sorts of questions. And now it's very different. So now what HR executives are thinking about are questions like, how do I create a more humane relationship between my company and my employees? One of the things that we realized during the pandemic was that it's this radical idea that the people that work for us are actually human beings with real problems, real challenges, and how do we support them in their lives? And
Mm-hmm.
so companies really spend a lot of time trying to figure out how do you actually help the people that happen to work with you, rather than simply trying to improve the productivity of the widget makers that you've got. And it's a very different philosophical viewpoint on how to approach it. And more kind of tangibly, some of the things that they're working on right now are questions like, how do we create a hybrid work environment where people are going to be able to work from wherever, whenever they want, in the amounts that they want, in a way that actually helps us still deliver solutions to the customers that we've got. And it's a really big, interesting, tough challenge from that perspective. They're thinking really practically about, now with a vaccine starting to roll out, how do we encourage our employees to get vaccinated, but not mandate that our employees do? And how do we create a safe work environment and manage that tension there? And then the big overarching thing that they're really thinking about, and this bubbles up in a variety of different ways, is how do I create a fairer, more equitable company where all of the employees that we've got have a good shot at being successful? But just as importantly, what we're finding is that companies that focus on fairness are companies that actually perform at a higher rate. So to give you an example, one of the things that we're finding is with remote work and a hybrid work environment, that remote employees can be just as productive, and on average are just as productive as in-office employees. But what we're also finding is that as offices are starting to open back up, it's more likely that men come back to work from the workplace and women continue to work from home. It's just the preferences that are playing out. But managers are more likely to give in-office employees a bigger raise than people that work from home. So you put those facts together, even though the performance is the same, the fact that men are more likely to come back to the workplace means managers are more likely to give them a higher raise, which means that the gender wage gap is going to get worse. And so how do all of these different things come together? And how do we build these fairer organizations as we've got all of these other things that are coming at us from all sorts of directions? It's a ton of really tough, really interesting problems that have a real profound impact on the performance of companies.
Interesting. This is very helpful. So, since you have the eyes and ears, the attention of the HR executives of these big companies, let's take a different seat here. So, for the audience, for someone who is either trying to make a career decision as to which industry or where they should go, or somebody who is in a mid career or their industry got impacted and now they are searching for a job, what is your advice to them in terms of preparing, in terms of looking for a job, in terms for, I see that you talk about hybrid workplace, reskilling, upskilling. So what's your advice for somebody who is actually making a career decision and who is
Yeah,
looking for a job? Which industries or where can they start?
yeah. So there's a couple things that are really interesting that's going on at companies. One, in terms of the skill sets that companies are looking for, uh, they have increased dramatically and they've changed a lot. So if you look at the average job description today compared to 5 years ago, it's got 50% more skills that they're looking for today than there were 5 years ago. So sorry, about 40% more skills now than there were 5 years ago. Um, and at first, when you look at that, that could be incredibly daunting as someone who's looking to make a career move, because you're going to look at that and say, well, I don't have half those things. Here's a dirty little secret that nobody does. The expectations that companies are writing in their job descriptions of over who they're looking for, it's almost impossible for a significant number of people to meet the ask that's there. So what they're really looking for are people close to this. And the way you need to think about what those different roles are is not necessarily what is that big shift, uh, and I have to get all the skills that I need before I make that big shift. That's just going to be an impossibility, and it's just not realistic. But what is realistic is to say, think about the skill sets and capabilities you've got right now. What are the places where those skills are most transferable? So, for example, companies are looking for a ton of people that are data scientists. There's not enough data scientists to go around. But if you're an actuary or if you're an accountant, you have a lot of the skills and capabilities that you need, but you're not writing it in a way that makes it sound like you're a data scientist. But think about those places where there's adjacencies and look at those adjacent skills that you've got, make those small transitions, small adjustments, because companies are actually really interested in that. And companies are willing to invest in you if you've got the skills adjacencies that are there. So that's kind of one big thing. Second big thing, as you're thinking about kind of the career part of it, where are the places to go, is how you actually position yourself. And what companies are starting to shift, Brian, to create a more inclusive pool of candidates to look at is not to have a certain set of requirements or a certain set of boxes that you've checked along your career. They're looking for what things you've achieved. So as you're thinking about the way you write your CV or your resume, think about it less as the skills list that you've got and more the accomplishments that you've had, the objectives that you've hit. Because what they're looking for now, and in this hybrid environment, this work from anywhere environment, companies have realized that simply because you've done a set of activities doesn't mean you're actually good. And what they realize as well going forward, it's going to be harder to monitor the steps and activities that an employee engages in. So what they're more interested in now is people that have accomplished particular objectives. So think about framing that as what objectives you've got, what things you've done. And if you do that, then you're more likely to look attractive on the labor market compared to people that just have a long list of stuff.
Cool. That's very helpful. So let's dive deep on the skills required for remote working. So, are you seeing any particular feedback or trends around some special skills required to work independently? Like you talk about the HR executives or companies are looking at how to provide employees the flexibility to not just work from anywhere but work at their own convenience and giving them the output. So I'm sure there
Yeah, for
must
sure.
be some certain skills or expertise required to be able to achieve that level of independence. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, a couple of interesting things there. As we move to more remote work, one of the things that we've looked at is uh, how do people who worked remote before the pandemic, this is analysis we did before that, because like once it hit everybody worked remote, it's just it's hard to really unpack that at this point in time. And we compared employees who worked remote versus those who didn't. One of the things that we found that's really interesting is that this belief that remote employees are these lone wolves out on an island by their own, being a pure individual contributor, is just not true.
Hmm.
That's just not what happens. When you really look at the comparison between employees that worked in the office and employees who worked remote, what you find is that employees who worked remote actually worked across more teams, but they were shallower across those teams. Employees who worked in the office worked across fewer teams, but were much deeper in those teams. So think about it as broad but shallow versus narrow but deep as the differentiator between the two. And so what is required to be successful working in a remote environment or a hybrid environment is actual incredibly good collaborative skills, connection skills, and the ability to work across multiple teams. Because one of the things that does happen if you're working remote or hybrid, and a lot of people are in the office, is that if you're not really proactive at making that collaboration happen, making those connections happen, sadly, it's easy to be forgotten about. And so one of the biggest differentiators for people that are working remote or working hybrid that defines their success is not that they have this incredible digital dexterity where they're incredibly fast to look at every piece of technology that's out there. They know how to use it, they're good enough at it, but they know how to make connections with employees. They know how to work across multiple teams. They're actually really good collaborators, not just pure play individual contributors. And they're able to build that robust network in that sort of remote environment. And as we move that way, that's going to become even more important because it's not just going to be you that's going to be working remote or hybrid. A lot of other people are. So how do you build those connections is going to be one of the key differentiators and most important things to be thinking about in a much more remote hybrid world.
Cool, that's very helpful. So, you work for a company that actually advises business leaders on the best technology to choose. So, I want to pick your brain on working remotely and networking. So, what's your advice on for people who are looking for a job or doing career searches? What in terms of networking and connecting with people, what tips or what advice you have for them?
Yeah, you know, there's a couple of thoughts that I've got there. Uh, Obviously, in a remote world, it's harder to meet people at conferences or events just because there's not those going on right now. Eventually, it'll come back. Hopefully, this fall with a vaccination rollout and those sorts of things. But that's different now. That's kind of first thought. Second thought is the generic outreach on platforms like LinkedIn and other things are, for most senior executives, when they receive them, it ends up being annoying
Yeah.
because most of that outreach tends to be, hey, I'm looking for a job. Here's my resume. Can you help me find a job? And if you're an executive, you're like, I'm busy. I would love to help you. I'm a good person, but I can't spend all my time helping you find a job. Um, what you have to create is some sort of value for that person that you're reaching out to. If that is, hey, I saw you working on this thing. Here's something interesting that you might find out about it. I'd love to talk to you about it. Hey, I saw that you were on a podcast about something. You're talking about this. Here's something that you might find interesting. But you also create value for the person that you're reaching out to, not to generate a response and generate those connections and start a conversation. Not because those people are selfish and they need that value to respond, but they're just overwhelmed to feel like they have to return that investment or create the willingness to return that investment for you. And just too much of the outreach that occurs is, I'm looking for a job, help me find a job,
Yeah.
go from there. It has to be a value generating outreach to increase the likelihood that you're going to get a response back from those different executives that are out there.
So, do you have any examples in that sense? you are a senior executive yourself. Uh, do you have
Yeah.
any examples of annoying reach outs that I should not call it annoying, but that were not good use of your time?
Less productive. Yeah. Yeah. They tend to be the uh, uh, hey, I'm looking for a job. Can you recommend me to work at Gartner? And like, I would love to, but I don't know much about the person. I don't know what they're interested in or anything like that. In contrast, there's people that have reached out to me that say, "Hey, I saw that this job posting was open. Um, here's why I think I'd be a good fit for it. Here's what I'd like to do." And that just makes it a whole lot easier for the recipient to help guide that person to the right spot. Because I absolutely want to be helpful, uh, but I need the person who's reaching out. This is true of any executive to at least get kind of 30% of the way there, and to say, here's the things where I think I might be a good fit. Here are the types of things I like to do. Here are the types of experiences that I've had the biggest impact on. And I get it's hard to navigate what a company looks like from the outside, but any sort of suggestion or direction in that perspective, then I can be helpful in saying, oh, given that this is the right type of place to, and the right type of people for you to connect with, and more than willing to do that, more than willing to help out in any way that I can. But I and any executive just needs some breadcrumbs that can start leading me down a path, and then from there I can go. But the cold interaction without any of that sort of direction, it just makes it hard to figure out what is the right way to help. And when any executive has to invest their time figuring out what is the right way to help, it just makes it harder to do. It makes it easier to delete that request. But it's harder to delete it if it's clear that the other person has done some work.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
No, that's very helpful. So jumping on to some of the trends that you highlight in your recent HBR article, and I wanted to ask you about remote hiring. I
yeah,
don't know if, since you are in the circle of the HR executives, but I know a lot of people who are looking for a job and they are not very successful with just submitting their resume and then just praying that they will get a call back from the recruiter. So,
sure.
and I know there are a lot of books, there are a lot of ideas about doing informational interviews, reaching out to people and introducing yourself. So, from for this hybrid era or work from anywhere era, what is your advice in remote hiring or searching for a job for working for anywhere? What
Yeah.
else, uh, or are you hearing from HR executives, what else the candidates can do to get on the radar and get noticed and get a chance to get interviewed?
Yeah. One of the things that's happening with remote work is that labor markets are getting thicker. And what I mean by that is historically, you really just thought about jobs in a particular location, unless you're willing to move. And frankly, most people aren't willing to move. They've got a family there, a community there, friends there, whatever it might be. And so uh, that constrained your job search in a lot of ways, which meant that companies got fewer applications and people applied to fewer places. But in a world of remote work, everything becomes thicker. Companies can pull from a much broader uh, uh, pool of candidates. People can apply to a lot more roles. And we often only think about it from one perspective, which is that, well, that's great. As a candidate, I can apply to a lot more places. So that's great for me as a candidate. But as a company, I get even more resumes than I did before. And there's not going to be more recruiters working at a company, but we've already started to see this, a significant increase in the number of resumes that companies get. That's a combination of the state of the labor market, but also a combination of remote work. And when there's more resumes that are emerge, what that means is that companies have to rely more on filtering technology to kick people out of the recruiting process. You just have to do that because it's just not realistic to look at every resume. In the past, that was done by keyword searches.
Yeah.
Now, more and more, it's done by algorithm, based on more on background, all those sorts of things. So one of the best things that you can do when you're applying for a role is to not simply look at what that job posting is saying, because you can then adjust your resume or application to reflect a lot of those things that that job posting is saying. But the reality with more and more screening being done by algorithm, the way those algorithms are set more often is they look at who are the most successful people that are currently in that role. And then that algorithm is trained based upon that data to say, well, here are the people I've got currently in the job that are most successful. Let's hire more people like that. We can talk all day long about what impact that has on diversity and inclusion. That's an important question, but a different question. So what you want to be looking at within your job search is look at the people that currently have that job at that company that have been the most successful. Look on their LinkedIn profile, people that have been promoted a lot. Look at what sort of experiences they've had. Then try to look within your own resume on things that mirror and look more like that, because the algorithms will catch those sorts of things. Sadly, in a world where there's more hiring done by algorithm, or I should say more screening done by algorithm, you have to write your resume in a way that best aligns with what that algorithm is going to be looking for. And yes, it is. Most of them are black boxy, but they're based off of trained data, or it's trained off a data set of existing employees. Look at those existing employees and try to mirror that. So that's kind of one thought for you. Second thought for you is more than ever, this idea of circumventing the recruiting process is more and more attractive. And so building connections with people that currently work at that company becomes more important, just as the volume of resumes increase as labor markets get thicker. You're just going to have to work harder at making that happen to build that sort of connection into an organization as you're looking for it. Relying on the traditional recruiting processes of applying through the website, applying through job boards, what have you, you can keep doing that, but in a world of remote work, the hit rate of that will become worse. It's just sad but true. That is what will happen.
So that's good. So you mentioned about these circumventing the traditional recruitment process. Are there any one or two tips you have other than, yeah, you did touch upon getting to know the people you are planning to work for, but let's say somebody, his job got impacted due to the pandemic and he or she is looking for a job. And I know that cold reaching out to people might take time to build a relationship, and then so it's a longer cycle as compared to the traditional resume submission process. So are there other ideas or any one or two tips you might have that can help them find that balance in terms of getting results in a shorter amount of time?
Yeah. So, if you're thinking about it for sort of kind of like the knowledge worker type of job, sort of things is where I'm going to be the most helpful for folks that are in that space. If you take a step back and look hard at how are companies thinking about their talent plans going forward, companies are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel from the economic environment that we're in, but we're still in the tunnel. And while they're becoming more comfortable with the idea of hiring, there's still an awful lot of uncertainty about the pace of economic recovery and when that's going to occur. So if you look at the speed of vaccination rollout, and then as that occurs, the economy will follow, but we're not exactly sure how fast vaccination is going to roll out. We're not exactly sure how quickly hiring is going to pick up after that. Being realistic, that's probably kind of Q4 of 2021, maybe a little bit later, maybe a little bit earlier, but kind of roughly around there is when we're starting to see real impacts from that occurring. If your job was impacted, you don't want to wait 9 months though for that to occur. And what companies are doing now, they're not yet willing to open up their hiring. They're doing it in a very targeted way in some roles in some places. So that is occurring. But what they are willing to do is move more into a contractor sort of environment. And they're willing to hire people for projects. They're willing to move more into the gig economy for knowledge workers. Uh, and what will happen is that as they move into that and start to bring people in for particular projects or contracts, and they're willing to do that because they know that's a short-term thing, that they can turn that on and off. There's less risk that's associated with that, given the uncertainties about the economy. But being able to move into that and be willing to take jobs, temporary jobs along that space, those are going to be the first people that are translated into full-time hires once hiring opens up. The willingness to work on those sorts of projects as you're doing the other things will position you well as that hiring occurs, because companies and CFOs are willing to, but they're not quite willing to fully open up hiring again until they've got better certainty as to when the economy improves. They believe it's going to, they just don't know when that's going to happen.
Got it. Got it. That's very helpful. So shifting gears here, moving on to working from anywhere. So I know all of us were forced into some of us were forced into working remotely. Some of
Yeah,
some of the knowledge workers were already working remotely. So just want to know from your perspective, what have you seen personally working from home, working versus working in office? What is it that was like insights for personally for you that you found in terms of working from home and going forward in a hybrid kind of a
yeah,
workplace? What is it that you think
yeah.
from the old office or in-person workplace? What is it that you think maybe that was not necessary, or any other insights you found in this work from home era?
Yeah, yeah, there's a couple of things I think are really interesting, uh, that have fundamentally changed work and will continue to change work going forward. One, the shift to working from home has taken a lot of the formality out of work, um, which is great. Uh, Even in terms of like what you wear. Like somehow if
Yeah.
you're working from home, it's okay to wear a sweatshirt to work, right? You never would have worn a sweatshirt to work in a lot of places, right? Unless you're like, in some sort of Silicon Valley startup, right? Like most places, you never would have worn a sweatshirt to work. You wear a sweatshirt to work when you're working from home, and it's completely fine. The number of calls I've done with CEOs where they're wearing like a t-shirt, like whatever, um, it's great. Like the formality of things going away, I think is wonderful. I think that's kind of at one level an interesting. And that formality of dress relaxation creates formality of interactions, which creates more personal relationships and less fake relationships based on like pomp and circumstance. I think that's good any way you look at it. That's kind of one thought. I think a second thought is what we really miss by working from home is, and one of the biggest problems that's out there is the loss of social connections. Um, we can replicate a lot of it through technology, but good Lord, like trying to have like a Zoom happy hour or
Yeah.
Zoom coffee break, like whatever, that's horrible. Let's just be honest with ourselves, and like just admit it, rather than try to fake it. Like
Yes.
it's not good,
Yeah.
right? Um, but as we move into this remote hybrid world, and like part of it, we're forced in this environment. Like I get it, it's the best we can do. People are trying, um, but as we move back and as we get through a vaccination period and all that sort of stuff, not forgetting and really appreciating the importance of the social emotional connections that are associated with work. Because the reality is, we don't need to go into the office to do our job most of the time. For like collaboration moments and other things, yes, it makes sense. But in the past, we went to an office because that's where typewriters were. That's where big mainframes were. And we didn't have the choice about working from anywhere. But now we do. And our tasks are not tied to our location anymore, but our relationships are tied to it. Our emotional connections are tied to it. Our social connections are tied to it. And so I think the workplace of the future becomes a much more social place than a task place. And as we think about what that looks like, the job of the office is to build relationships, not to do work. And so a lot of this talk about, everyone is going to be working remote, we can get rid of 90% of our office footprint. It's a little bit too crazy town talk because of this emotional social part of it. People want to be around other human beings. Like that is our nature for the most part. There's like, there's not true for everyone, but the vast majority of people, right? And the importance of that social emotional, I think, is a huge thing. And how do we build an environment where we're able to maintain that social emotional connection that's associated with work? About like, what did your kids do that weekend? What sporting event did you see? What about that show you watched on Netflix? Whatever. Like that's critically important. And I think a third thing that's really important is your health, your physical health in particular. Early on in the pandemic, and this I think happened to a lot of people, is like, you go from your bedroom to your kitchen to your workplace, which is either back in your bedroom or in your kitchen, maybe your couch, and you do that like all day. And so what do? It's like you snack all day long, you barely move. And I remember one day for me back in May or April, something like that, it's like I looked at my phone, I was like, you've had 800 steps today. And I'm like, oh my God, this is horrible. Like this is how people like have all sorts of health problems that emerge. And one of the enormous risks is just your health that's associated with a remote environment. I was talking to one company and they have incentive programs that track employee participation in health and those sorts of things. And what they realized that at scale, this was a real problem because they could track the number of steps that their employees were taking through their fitness programs. And they just cratered in March, April, and May. And so they had to double down back on health related things. So, a very basic thing, but like for some of your meetings during the day, just make them walking meetings. Things like that, but really being thoughtful about your own personal health is absolutely critical. So, I put all of that together and there's a sense of like social connections that are really important, thinking about those relationships that are really important, thinking about your health that's really important, because we run the risk of, being confined in our homes, focused on our own things and losing out on all of that. And all of that is bad, and how do you build these moments, these times when you get enough sleep, these times when you eat well, these times when you walk and engage in activities to protect your own well-being becomes so much more important and are so easy to forget about in a remote/hybrid environment.
I love it. I love it. Especially, the picture you painted in my mind that the future workplace is more about building relationships, building connections, and socializing, and not just for doing a work related task. So that's really good. And definitely health. Like in your trends that you highlight, mental health support is the new normal. So
Yeah.
definitely would love to hear from you. Like I know a lot of HR executives or HR business functions have introduced these concepts about doing these virtual meditations and things like that. I don't know what are your thoughts if they are successful at all, but I think mental health is definitely something which is very important in a hybrid environment where people have to take care of themselves. So what is your advice there?
Yeah, I can tell you a story about a company that we work with there as well. Um, this is a large employer in a relatively small community, so they have a lot of couples that work for them. And one of the things that they found was, towards the end of the summer of 2020 into the fall of 2020, is that the divorce rates of the people that worked with them started increasing. And a lot of that was because you had two people that worked together, lived together, and it just created conflict that was there, sadly. Um, and so what they actually did was started to offer marital therapy as a benefit to their employees. And so that isn't kind of the traditional sense of mental health of talking to a therapist, but it's thinking about the whole employee. Another good example of where it's not just about mental health, but thinking about the whole picture of those employees. There's another company that we work with that what they realized that was impacting a lot of their employees during the pandemic wasn't just what was happening to their employees directly, but what was happening to the employees' families. So, like their kids were struggling with school, they might have had a loved one who lost a job, and so on. So, they created a whole set of support mechanisms for the family of their employees. So, for example, what they would do was they opened up their learning platform to the loved ones of their employees to help those employees upskill if they had lost a job. Uh, they started creating classes and summer programs for the kids of their employees. They started extending their benefits to the parents of their employees in different cases. Another example of what they've done is there was a lot of their employees that were concerned when their kids went to college, especially if they're moving farther away during the pandemic, about ways that they could be helped during those things. And what they realized that an employee assistance line for people across the globe to call in if like a bad thing happened in case there was an emergency. So they gave that phone number to the employees' kids to say, if there's an emergency and you can't get a hold of your parents, call this number, and then we as a company will help you. So it's ways not just thinking narrowly about the mental health of their employees around, do we provide that as a benefit, much like we provide any other health benefit? It's taking a step back and saying, how can we build deeper connections with our employees, where we help them with the problems that people have? And people have problems about their loved ones losing their job, about fighting with their spouse, about worrying about their kids, about worrying about their parents, like these real human conditions, these real things that we all struggle with in different ways. But that next step is, not just here's another benefit to offer, but let's have a philosophically different point of view, which is how do we help the people that work for us like they're our friends and our loved ones, and we help them have better lives, not just do things that make them better workers. And that shift from being a worker to being a person is really profound. And that's the viewpoint that they're trying to take as they go into this next generation of this new deal between employees and employers.
Yeah, that's very insightful for me, especially like in one of the comments you talk about creating personalized employee experience. And
Yeah,
especially in the hybrid workplace, I think it's very important to be successful. The more self-aware you are, the better, the more productive, and the more value you can create for your employer. So I think
yeah,
the HR business or HR uh, organization has to focus on creating these incentives or these programs that can help employees know more about in what kind of environment, what time of the day, what setup they are most productive in, so that they can giving them, like you are talking about, providing these phone number to the college going uh, kids and all kinds of things, so that employee can focus on work and create the value that is expected out of him.
yeah. And the thing that people get really focused on, HR executives get focused on, is like, well, how many people are using it? Uh, how many people are taking advantage of it? What is the number of users we have? And yeah, you should track that. I don't mean you should just ignore it entirely, but that's not the metric to think about. The metric to think about is, do employees know we care about them? And if they know we care about them and they've got awareness of that, that sense of awareness and appreciation is actually more valuable than if they actually use the thing. So it's like knowing I'm loved as an employee and knowing that I'm taken care of and knowing that I'm cared about
Yeah.
is more important than what is the specific program that's there. So you want to be able to lift up at this broader relationship. And it's like knowing I'm loved matters more than you showing it to me through this one specific thing. I mean, that's what you want to create, in the sense of like, I as an employee know that my employer is going to do everything they can to help take care of me. And that's what we're looking at in the future. And the best companies, the most progressive companies, the ones that are getting the best results, are really asking the question, which is, what can I do to help the lives of the people that work for me be better? And the really approach of, let's not just think about how can I make work better, but how can I make their life better? How can I not just think about improving their employee experience, but how can I think about improving their life experience? And that's the way that we're moving, and that's the expectation that employees are increasingly having of their employer.
This is good. This is very good. I really enjoyed the conversation. And few more questions. Working
Yeah,
from home, what is your advice to folks in terms of being productive while they are working from home?
yeah. I think there's a couple of things. Uh, One, as you're working from home, you have to understand what your personal rhythms look like. Are you, to oversimplify it, a morning person, an afternoon person, an evening person? Uh, do you need to have a mental commute to work or not? And there's, times for myself when I realize that what I need to do is go have a coffee break at work, much like I would have done if I was in the workplace. Uh, there's a lot of evidence that suggests that uh, once you've worked beyond kind of 90 minutes in a row, if that long for a lot of people, your productivity levels fall off. So how do you structure your day in a way that you intentionally create breaks? You intentionally create moments of distraction. How do you start to identify when those rhythms of you being more productive are? Because one of the biggest risks of working remote is that you wake up in the morning and your office is your home and you're always at work and always at home. So you have to be intentional about being on and off and when you do it. But the most important thing to realize, I believe, is um, nobody can be productive for 10, 11 hours in a row unless maybe there's like some sort of artificial drug or some sort of other
Yeah.
stimulant that you feel is being used, and then like there's a different problem going on. Um, but understanding how and when and where you're the most productive and creating real guardrails around that, I think is absolutely critical for employees to be successful.
Cool. This is very helpful. Something about what is your favorite book that you always refer back to? Could be any subject, any topic that you always go back to that helps you in terms of guides your life's philosophy, guides your life decisions, and
Yeah.
you use it at your workplace for your career decisions. So, what is that one book that you always go back to?
Some are kind of economics textbooks, and so there's a variety of lessons that I picked up from different books. Uh, there's the best textbook that I reference and go back to all the time is a book called Policy Analysis from Weimer and Vining, and it's years old. What I love about that book is it frames up the economic problems that organizations have, uh, and frames up why policies don't work, why other situations don't work, and gives innovative solutions to it. It's incredible from that perspective. Uh, so as I think about work problems or organizational problems, that's the thing I go back to again and again and again. As I think about personal problems and kind of relationship related stuff, I tend to be much more of a New Testament guy than an Old Testament guy from that perspective. And so that sort of philosophy drives a ton of things. And then I would, to kind of answer the question slightly differently, what is the thing that I'm reading now that is helping me the most now is a book called Upstream uh, by one of the Heath brothers. And the thing that I just think is really interesting about it from a business perspective is uh, we spend way too much time worrying about the problem that's in front of us rather than asking a different question, which is, should we even be worrying about this problem? And how, by moving upstream in our thinking, gets us to a different set of questions. And like, should we even be working on this? And I think all too often, executives say, oh, we've got a problem, let's solve this problem, without answering that more important question, which is, do I even care about this problem? Is this even a thing we should be working on? And it's our nature as human beings to run to solve a problem that's in front of us rather than asking that more profound question, should we even be thinking about this or worrying about this?
Cool. This is very helpful, Brian, and I'll add these two books on my reading list, and I'll definitely go through them, and will definitely connect with you and discuss, share my notes, and talk about it. But I really appreciate you sharing insights on the future workplace. Uh, Love all kinds of things you have shared, and I'm going to put it in the notes and we'll share it with the viewers.
Great.
Thank you so much, Brian, for your time today.
Great. Thanks for having me, and really enjoyed it. Let me know what I can do to help out in the future.
Thanks for listening. You can continue to hear the full episode on our YouTube channel or Apple iTunes or Spotify. Go there and search for the Superhuman Project and you will find us. Also, if you would like to contact us, please go to our LinkedIn page and send us a direct message. Until next time, thank you again.